Welcome to the Property and Coffee Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Atkinson.
I'm Matt Skehan.
We'll be fueling your financial future one coffee and property insights at a time.
Helping you navigate the property market like a pro.
Hello, and what a pleasure it is to have your company on the Property and Coffee Podcast today, where we are going to be fueling your financial future one coffee and property insight at a time. I'm your host, Matt Atkinson, joined by my co-host, Matt Skehan.
Thanks for having me, Matty. Good to be back. Another week.
It is. Before we dive into it, we're just going to touch on our order of events. So we're going to hear what people have been saying around the barbecue. Moving on to our guest segment, we will be joined shortly by Ash Whitehead, a Melbourne-based health and wellness advocate with a focus on mental health. She'll be sharing a bit on her journey and how your mental wellness can impact your decision-making and why this is especially important when you are making big decisions such as purchasing a property. We'll then be wrapping up the episode with some key actionable takeaways. Maddie, we spoke a few weeks ago about the issue of underquoting in the Melbourne property market. What we've seen in the news recently, how Victoria is stepping it up to make sure that underquoting is something, hopefully, is a thing of the past. And there's two items we're going to touch on which are being introduced to help curb that issue. The first one is mandatory reserve price disclosure. Can you give us a little bit of insight as to what that is and how that is going to help people that are looking to purchase a property?
Yeah, 100%, Matty. And I think firstly, it's obviously not legislation yet, is it? I think it's obviously just on the radar though. So obviously things have moved a bit since we talked about this last time. But basically it's obviously reserve disclosure is 7 days before an auction, or whether that's a private sale or expression of interest deadline, having to disclose that reserve price. So I think that's a huge step, right? If this does come into effect, because obviously I know a lot of my job is educating clients and often looking at properties that are not in their budget. So they might be wasting time and resources as well with that building and pest inspections, contract reviews, getting emotionally invested. So I think at least knowing, sort of having a benchmark or some for buyers, I think it's a great thing. So obviously it's still proposed, but I think it's definitely moving in the right direction to give some transparency in often an untransparent process. Obviously the auction is, but you don't want to be there if you're not even in the game, right? So I think having some awareness of where the game is and where you need to be, I think it's a step in the right direction at the moment. So yeah.
Would we see, if agents are non-compliant, would we see any penalties or I guess sanctions introduced against them if they don't comply with this disclosure, provided it's introduced?
Yeah, it's a great question, and obviously I imagine that there'd have to be some penalties or something if you're not going to comply, right? So obviously it's still to be decided, isn't it really? So it's still to be worked out. Again, step in the right direction, but I think again you can't put some new rules in there if there's no punishment. There's no point, right? Is there? So I think there'll definitely be some consequences, I'd imagine, if people aren't going to play by the rules as well. So again, it potentially it should change the landscape of how auctions work and pricing and the strategy as well. So it's a watch this space, but it's exciting, right? If you're a buyer and the real estate market is as I said, it needs to to level that playing field. I think it's exciting movement for the buyers.
Well, that's it, and everyone just buying, us included, who are in that space.
Yep.
We just want to have a bit of transparency and know what we're dealing with, so we can also communicate that message to our clients. Who, again, it's an emotional decision for a lot of people. So they're invested, and you want to make sure that their expectations are realistic, and this helps that process. Yeah,
100%. I think transparency and just a fair fight is all people want, right? Just so they don't get the wool pulling over them, which has been happening a little bit.
Fair enough. The second one that's being talked about is a push for stricter comparable property guidelines. Can you just walk us through at a high level what this is looking like?
Yeah, so CAV, or Consumer Affairs, is obviously just cracking down on those comparable sales. I think I went through that at a prior session. So it's basically just trying to make them a bit more like for like, right? Which makes sense, but obviously, so that's a good thing, right? So that way, hopefully that quote range is more accurate. So to give an example, agents got to consider whether the property is renovated or unrenovated. That's obviously a materially a big difference. The build status, obviously even the material used, school zones, proximity to shops, and other features like that as well. So it's another step in the right direction for hopefully getting a bit more accurate comparables and three of those in place, rather than just I suppose historically just having whatever's sold in the vicinity. So again, just educating buyers, but again, you obviously got to do your own research, I suppose, own due diligence. You can't just rely on external sources. But again, hopefully it's another step in the direction of the buyer and just cutting the crap, I suppose, cutting the BS and just being a bit more transparent and honest about where the value sits.
That's fair. And I'd like to think it makes, as you said, a buyer, gives them a bit more information, yourself included, a bit more visibility, especially around that if the mandatory price is disclosed. But we've all seen places where you got a house comparable, one street over, land size is the same, looks similar, but all of a sudden, that's sold for significantly more or less. And it's, sometimes you're trying to work out how's that, trying to draw a bridge between the two and understand. And hopefully that, obviously if this was to move ahead, just pushes that transparency in the right direction.
100%, Matty.
Today, we're cutting through the complexity with a true expert, Ash Whitehead, a Melbourne-based health and wellness advocate with a focus on mental health. She'll be sharing on her journey and how your mental wellness can impact your decision-making. This is especially important when making big decisions such as purchasing a property. Ash, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's lovely to be here.
Thanks, Ash. An important question up front. Where's your favourite place to drink your favourite coffee in Melbourne?
I would have to say the Little Elephant in Hyatt does the best almond latte, in my opinion.
It's a good little one. I remember going there with the kids when they were young, so it's a good little local there, off the beaten path in Hyatt, so a good little spot. So
yeah.
Well, let's pivot a little bit just into, before we step into understanding a bit more around your current career in health and wellness, let's take a step back. You were obviously in the professional space, a career there. Would be interested to understand a bit more around what you did and what were some of the biggest challenges you faced.
Yeah. So I started my career actually back in the well-being space. I worked had my own nutrition consultancy and did personal training and things back in the day. Then I moved over to Australia and I moved into the very fast-paced world of medical technology, and I lived there for about 17 years. So working in high pressure corporate sales in pharmaceuticals and med devices, and an industry which I absolutely loved. I guess one of the biggest challenges was that I felt a lot of the days that I was on a bit of a treadmill, and it was one of these treadmills that was just constantly going, and somebody was like pressing the speed up button and I couldn't slow down. And for a long time, that was just my days, and I just kept going and going. I probably prided myself on my relentless work ethic, but I guess somewhere along the line, that constant busyness and being on all the time did start to take a toll. And, when you're living in that high-paced environment all of the time, you can then start to become frustrated with, some of the things that you have to do. And, you live in a state of reactivity a lot of the time. So yeah, it was brilliant space to work in, but yeah, for a long time, it just felt very, very high paced, high pressure.
Don't really have a bit of downtime. Essentially, you might have holidays, but a lot of the time you're probably, I'd imagine, also thinking a little bit about work or when you're getting back on what you need to do, and just sort of always that's ticking away in the background of your
Absolutely.
brain.
I wasn't one of those people who could switch off. It was just constantly, might be at home, but I wasn't necessarily at home. I was still kind of thinking, right, well, where's my next meeting? Where's the next surgeon I need to meet? And where's the target I'm going to hit and things like that.
So was there a specific moment, Ash, where there was a catalyst or it made you pivot your career to the health and wellness space that you focus on now? Was there a moment or realization in that journey?
Yes, there was quite a big moment. In 2020, I had something happen that I guess will forever change the course of my life. I honestly thought the only thing I had to worry about in 2020 was where I was getting my next toilet roll from and homeschooling my two young kids.
Interesting times.
But I had something very interesting that happened one Sunday morning when I was on the toilet. I'd finished what I was doing and I was just getting up, and the next thing I face planted, fainted, and went hard down onto the bathroom floor. To cut a very long story short, what ended up happening was that a brain aneurysm was found on my brain, and I ended up having brain surgery in the middle of one of our lockdowns.
Gee.
So you could say that was pretty hectic, and I guess you would call it a little bit of a wake-up moment. And I'm actually extremely fortunate for that happening. For me, fainting that Sunday morning wasn't actually linked to my brain aneurysm. It was a completely random occurrence, but what it did do was it led to my aneurysm to be found, and then for me being able to have a successful operation on that. Because if it hadn't been found in that moment, in the words of my neurosurgeon, that thing was about to blow. And the reality is, if that had happened, I possibly wouldn't be sitting here at all right now, or certainly not in this capacity. So I guess that whole moment and that time for me made me realize a very crucial truth, and that is that running ourselves ragged and being busy all the time is, it's not a badge of honor. It's a recipe for burnout, and ultimately it's a recipe, to not living a life that we're truly thriving. So for me, I decided that I was going to put my well-being right at the top of my to-do list, because before that, my well-being was the thing that was getting bumped.
Yep.
I was like, I need to go to the gym. Oh, actually, no, I've got this meeting I need to go to. Or, I should really go to bed early tonight. Do you know what? I'm going to sit up and watch another episode of Netflix just because, I need time just to myself. So for me, it was like, do you know what? We only get one chance on this magical journey of life. So let's make it actually count. So yes, you could say that was a bit of a pivot moment.
Well, thanks for sharing. It's very candid, and obviously a significant moment. So it's 2020 was a big year for a lot of people, right? But obviously it's significant, for yourself, big year. So
no doubt, not even just with the challenges of your health scare, but I mean trying to navigate, the pandemic with restrictions around getting into hospitals, limitation around. You mentioned obviously you got family overseas as well, trying to come in or if they needed to help out, it does make it quite a difficult time. But we're glad to have you here sitting with us today. And that wasn't, I was going to say in this capacity. Just maybe touching a bit more on your, if I could call it your past career, but during that time of, as you say, really involved in that corporate environment, there would have been a number of fundamental skills that you would have picked up, but also frustrations. And interested to understand how maybe some of those as the building blocks have translated into your your wellness practice today, and how you've used those to build forward in terms of what you deal with or speak to on a daily basis.
Yeah, I think if we look at my former career, we're all on a learning journey. And I think what translates into what I'm doing now is the fact that I have walked the walk. I've lived in people's shoes. I know what the busy demands of, a high-paced corporate world, busy working parent, all of those things. Working for years in leadership roles, that also gives you the skills to, really be able to communicate well with people, to learn, how adults learn. And I think the frustrations, I suppose, are that, we live in a world where we're meant to be on all the time, and we have to hit this deadline and this and that. We need to give more and more and more of ourselves. And I think what I really learned there was that you can be a high performer. I think we all want to be high performers, yeah?
Yes.
But you don't need for that to come at the detriment of your well-being. And, I had a moment probably years before that where, I had severe burnout, and I did a little bit there to kind of help that, but then I just kept going at that pace. So I guess some of the skills that I've learned there translate really well now. It's that to be that high performer that we all want to be, putting our well-being at the top of the to-do list is what we need to be doing there. And, I think then also living that and walking all of that, you've got that empathetic lens now that I can have with, the clients that we work with at EQ Minds, and also my own personal clients. Like, I understand the frustrations. I understand what it feels to be, stressed to the max and feel that you don't have time. And I understand what you need to do to actually be able to be the high performer we all want to do, but to do that in a really sustainable way.
Yep. It's almost ironically work less to an extent, make sure those other areas are full, and you sort of, doing your best around health, wellness, to ensure that actually what you're producing on the work front is of a high quality.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, thanks, Ash. So what does holistic wellness mean to you personally, and why did you choose to focus on this area? There's obviously lots of different areas, but holistic wellness is a focus of yours. Why?
So I like to think of holistic wellness as treating the whole person and all of the aspects of our well-being rather than just the symptoms that can sometimes crop up. So it's all interlinked. So what we put in our bodies, how we move our bodies, how we feed our brains and our minds, how we, connect with people around us, all of these things are interconnected. And if we're not putting energy into each of these, I call them buckets, then we can't then, I believe we can't then really truly perform at our best. And sometimes we think we're performing at our best and we might be there with people around us physically, but our brains are actually somewhere else. We might be in a meeting with a client, but we're thinking, I've got to do this later on. And you're not really connecting with people. Or we might be reading our kids a bedtime story, but we're going through this to-do list for tomorrow. So when you actually do focus on all of the aspects and the, whole person, then you can really, I believe, connect with people on a different level, and you can connect with yourself on a different level. And you're also then going to increase things like productivity, creativity, all of these things that you unlock when you are actually working at your full potential.
100%. Physio in a past life, and I think you can't just treat the symptoms, right? You can't put the Band-Aid, so you've got to get to the underlying cause. I think it completely makes a lot of sense, Ash. So,
because I think sometimes we think, you can sleep your way, or I should probably say rest your way out of burnout, but you can't do that if your mindset's not strong. Or, you can't be the most productive you are if you're, not eating well and your energy is spiking all throughout the day and things. So we often think these things are separate, but they're very linked together. Yeah, very linked.
Fair enough. We're at the time of year, we're a couple of weeks away going into the festive season. And at this time, everyone is typically a bit tired. It's been a busy year, looking forward to a bit of a break. And one of the things we see, and you can pick it up, speak to people, you would pick up some burnouts. So what we'd like to unpack a bit more is, how do you see it, or how would you define it? And what are some of the key symptoms or signs people overlook that would be good for them to identify that they heading into that arena?
Yeah. So burnout is the state of physical, emotional, and cognitive exhaustion. And it is brought on with this constant chronic stress that kind of filters into those three areas. Often it's this really kind of silent build that people don't realize until all of a sudden it's there and it's right in front of them. It can start off with things like waking up in the morning, you've gone to bed and you may have been in bed for 8 hours but still feeling tired. It can creep in with being irritable at people, whereas previously maybe you've been a lot calmer, or feeling really overwhelmed when actually your workload maybe hasn't increased, and just this feeling of maybe not being able to cope the way that you used to. I kind of think of it as a bit of an analogy like a flat tire. So there could be a leak in your tire that you're not really sure of. And then all of a sudden you've got a flat tire and you're like, how did I get here? Whereas we need to be looking at how can I, remind myself that I need to put air in the tires or put my car in for a service and all of these things. But yeah, it can be this really quiet build, but then all of a sudden it's there, and it can be completely debilitating, when it's actually there in front of you.
Cool, thanks, Ash. So as the year's winding down now and people are often running on empty, can you explain the psychological link between burnout, exhaustion, and even the link to poor decisions, whether that's in life or business or just, there's a lot of decisions and stuff that happen this time of the year, but obviously I'm sure you see the link and with the people you treat and consult.
Yeah, so I would say, and I might start with more kind of tuning into neurologically or what kind of is happening, I guess, in the brain. So when we're in that state of burnout or, whether it's emotional, physical, cognitive exhaustion, the brain can go from functioning in like the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain which is responsible for all your decision making, problem solving, impulse control, and emotional regulation. And
Pretty important.
very important. That's the stuff that keeps you sharp and makes decisions and things. That can then switch more into what you call your fight or flight zone. So it's where more your limbic system, your amygdala is kind of taking over within the brain. When that is happening, you're then coming more from a reactive space. Yep. That's when maybe you say hurtful things or make irrational decisions. At this time of year, that's when people can start to spend more, can start to overcommit, and start to feel really overwhelmed. And, I think if you speak to people right now, a lot of people are like, oh, it's that kind of busy time of the year. So there is actually, there's things that are going on in the brain for that. So, we want to try and switch back and live more in that state where our prefrontal cortex is in charge and our fight or flight response is not running the show. When we're sitting in that chronic state of fight or flight, that chronic state of stress, it just means that decisions are harder to make. We're not going to be, again, I've said this before, but not be as productive as we'd like to be. And you end up just being in this cycle of being really, really busy, doing things and trying to tick off to-do lists, but being, and being more reactive instead of just being able to do those things in a calmer, more focused manner. So, really trying to do things that can keep us in that space of more calm, so when that chaos is going on around us, we can still actually manage it, but not move into that state of burnout and that chronic state of stress.
And that's, as you say, you might feel like you getting through a to-do list, but you're not maybe thinking around what it is you're actually doing. So it might, fortunate if it's simple things, not a problem. But if you're trying to apply your mind a bit more to something where you require a bit of brain power, potentially not, giving it the attention it deserves in terms of to understand what it is when you're in a bit of that, I guess, exhaustion or a bit of that chaotic state. We often see people push through the holidays making big and costly mistakes because they're simply just too run down to think clearly. What are one or two practical strategies they can implement right now just to pause and regain clarity around their decision making?
So the first thing I would say is that we all need to breathe. And often it's one of the things that we forget to do, or it changes when we're, feeling a bit stressed. I talked about that fight or flight before. So one thing that I like to do, there's a strategy called the 60-second reset that I do. And this is simply where you breathe in for 4, hold for 2 at the top, and then breathe out for 6. So your exhale is longer than the inhale. And you do that for 3 or 4 rounds. It might not even take a minute, but a minute maximum. And what you're doing when you're really breathing in for 4, really breathing into the belly, you're switching from that fight or flight state into, you're switching your parasympathetic nervous system on. So that's your rest and digest nervous system. And when you breathe like that, you also are telling your brain and your body, hey, everything's okay. We've got this. We're good. So a really simple tool that you can do and use, and at any point throughout the day, it's really good to use this, just when you're about to go into a meeting, so that you're really focused and calm going in there, or, when you're about to walk in the door at the end of the day as well, to really kind of switch between that work mode into family life and things like that. So breathing. And the second thing I would say is to really tune into mindfulness. And please don't be rolling your eyes at home around this. Mindfulness, I do believe, is pivotal to everything that we do. And we often go from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next, and are not actually there and present in the present moment. And what mindfulness does is it teaches us to slow down throughout the day and amongst the chaos of the day. So what the mindful moment cue is, it is a cue, and it's an external cue, which is personal to you. And when you see or hear that cue, it's your reminder just to check in. Where are my thoughts? We have about 70,000 thoughts a day. So where are my thoughts? Is my mind racing? What do I need right now? Am I holding tension? Do I need to breathe? What do I need? And for me personally, I have one that I use, and it's when I'm driving, and if I hit a red light, that is my mindful moment cue. And in that moment, I just have to go, whoa, where are you, Ashley? Where are your thoughts? And, sometimes I might be catastrophizing about something, or, maybe I am there in the moment, but it's my cue to be in the moment, to release any tension, and just to actually be there. I once recall years ago when I used to was driving my kids off just to daycare and hitting red lights, and I was so stressed. I thought I was going to be late, and I was, I'm going to be late. And they got out of the car and they were so frazzled, and they looked at me and they were like, Mom. And it just really hit me that, your reactivity and how we are sometimes can then really, be passed on to other people. So from then I decided I was going to use the red light as my little moment, just to really stop, pause, and tune in, and just kind of calm my thoughts and just be there in that moment.
And Melbourne's traffic would give you a fair bit of opportunity to dial in.
Absolutely. I'm very mindful now.
Thanks, Ashley. Two great tips there. So just in terms of a person's relationship with their own physical and mental wellness or lack thereof, how does that impact their professional or financial boundaries, and I suppose that decision making that people go through with their own limiting beliefs potentially?
Yep. So I think that when it comes to your physical wellness and your decision making things, they're all interlinked. Yep. So if you're not moving your body in a certain way or at all, if you're not fueling your body with the right food, if you're not getting enough sleep, all of that then has a knock-on effect to how you are then acting in whichever world you are in, if that's financial or whatever you are. And often we think that they're separated, but they're not. Everything is completely linked. And by, really focusing and putting time and effort into those other parts of our well-being, it means that we're going to be more productive. We're going to be more connected with people. We live in a world where we're so hyper connected, but yet so disconnected. It means we can actually connect better with people. Therefore, you also then will be more likely to put more boundaries in place as well, and not live in that reactivity mode as well, and just be able to make decisions that come from a much better place.
Cool.
Can you share a story either from your own personal life or from a client's where struggle has led to ultimately burnouts, an impaired decision being made, but that's resulted in a positive transformation down the track for them?
Yeah. And I guess I can share that, prior to my brain aneurysm, years prior, back in 2011, I was diagnosed with quite severe depression. And this was at a time where the stigma around mental health was still very, very high. And, I lived quite a quiet battle with myself. I didn't share what was going on with others. And I was living very much in that reactivity mode. And, I wanted to be that high performer, but I was just, going and being quite reactive. I probably wasn't that fun to work with at that point in time because, I was quite emotional with some of my decisions and very reactive and quite fiery. And I guess what that time taught me was that firstly, once I sought help and professional help for that and began to put some tools in my toolbox for my mental health, then I was able to come at my career from a completely different lens. And prior to that, I wanted to be that high performer, but it was like really messy. And, I was kind of like, I used to finish the days and I was kind of like stumbling and gasping for breath at the end of the day. Whereas after that, by being able to put some tools like mindfulness and, meditation practices and really starting to look at, right, how does my food actually impact me? And what about sleep? That was a massive factor for me as well. How do these things then, how are they going to impact me in a really positive way? And then after that, I like to think that I was then still this high performer, but in a way more sustainable way, and in a way that was a lot calmer. And I was actually getting towards the end of the day, and it was, it was a lot more graceful, and it wasn't just this chaotic, reactive kind of state that I was in all the time.
Thanks for sharing, Ash, and being so vulnerable and open with us. We really appreciate that. So based on, I suppose, your own personal experience and your coaching, is there, you've already mentioned a few, but just for our listeners, like 3 key tips to help stop getting to that burnout, to that end stage? Is there some good? I'm sure there is. You've talked on a few, but the key tips for us.
So I guess firstly, well-being has to be the top of your to-do list. Okay, it has to be. But within that, I would say that the way that you start your day is really important. I like to anchor my day, if you like, in some form of well-being, something that is actually going to be good for your well-being. So instead of letting the world in to dictate your day, by picking up your phone straight away, just pause that. And, it could even just be stretching in bed. It could be popping outside and for a walk, or getting some morning sunlight into your eyes. It could be hitting the gym, whatever that means to you, but doing something before the craziness of the day comes in. That's a really good way just to really start the day on a really good tone. The second one would be the flip side to that. So how you finish your day. So sleep is the most underrated performance enhancer that we have. It's the most important tool that we have, but yet it's usually the thing that kind of gets bumped a lot of the time.
Elusive.
Yeah, when we're busy. So really making sure that you're prioritizing sleep. And one way that I like to do that is I set an alarm at the end of the day, and I set an alarm about 30 minutes before I go to bed. And when I hear that alarm, it's an alarm that says, hey, Ashley, get off your phone, start doing some form of wind down routine. Often we can sit, with our phones stuck in our faces right until the moment we go to bed. There's lots of things that happen with your sleep in regards to that. You've got the blue light kind of affecting different stages of sleep, but also quite often the content that we're looking at on our phones as well, or on the TVs and things can then mean that it's not conducive to a good night's sleep. So really prioritizing sleep. And then the third one would be round about really finding those micro moments throughout the day that you can just have little moments to pause. We often think if we just power through our days, we're going to get everything done, but that doesn't make us more productive. It doesn't make us more creative. So if we can actually just have tiny little pauses, that could just be, just going to get up from the computer, go around the block once. Could just be stretching for 30 seconds or back to what I talked about before, breathing, but just having those little micro moments throughout the day, which will then make you more productive. They'll make you calmer. And it kind of, when you're doing that, it just means you're resetting your nervous system throughout the day. So you're not, you might do something that causes a bit of stress, but by doing these, you just bring that stress level back down a little bit. And then, something might happen to cause a little bit more stress, and that's fine. But then you do something to bring it back down, just so that you're not kind of compiling.
Cumulative,
Yeah. So yeah, they would be my 3 tips for you.
Go win the morning, finish well, and little segments on the way. So that's really actionable tips. So appreciate those. They're good.
Absolutely.
Just to end off, if you could give our listeners a permission slip, so one thing they could either stop doing or start doing before we see the end of the year, what would that be?
I would say permission slip is to prioritize yourself first. And but what I mean by that is to really focus on self-care and self-care for yourself. So we all know the phrase, you can't pour from an empty cup, but it is so true. And often, especially at this time of year, we're constantly pouring to everybody else and not filling our cup. But when you do something every day, just a little bit of something, that could just be sitting in the sun and having, 3 minutes to drink a cup of coffee by yourself. That could be your self-care, whatever that means to you. It means then that you can go into your meetings and your interactions with people, a lot more connected. And it just means that, your cup is full, and then you can then give to those around you.
Ash, thank you for coming and joining us on the Property and Coffee podcast and sharing a bit of insights into your journey, but also very importantly, a lot of value add for ourselves and also our listeners around understanding, things we should be prioritizing, especially this time of year, but also all year round. not to lose sight of that when we sort of get into January and the year kicks off. But we do appreciate you coming in and sharing with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and happy holidays.
Thanks, Ash. Yeah.
If you would like to keep receiving property insights and golden nuggets from our guests, please do follow us and you'll get the latest episode released on a fortnightly basis.